The fluorescent lights of the logistics office hummed with a low, annoying buzz that Anya had learned to tune out years ago. Outside the small, dusty window, the heat of the afternoon sun was baking the tarmac of the military base, but inside, Anya felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She was a chief warrant officer, a woman who had spent 15 years of her life serving her country with absolute dedication. She wasn't a soldier who carried a rifle, she fought with spreadsheets, supply chains, and an unbreakable sense of right and wrong. That day, however, the numbers on her screen were threatening to break her. Anya stared at the monitor, her coffee going cold beside her. She had been auditing the supply manifests for the last quarter, a routine task that was usually as boring as watching paint dry. But something caught her eye. A shipment of advanced medical kits, worth millions, had been signed out as delivered to a remote outpost in the desert. The problem was, Anya knew for a fact that outpost had been abandoned 3 months ago. She rubbed her temples, thinking it must be a clerical error, a simple mix-up of numbers. It happened. She leaned closer to the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard to dig deeper. What she found made her stomach drop. It wasn't just the medical kits. It was ammunition. It was vehicle parts. It was construction equipment. Millions of dollars of military gear was leaving the base, officially listed as lost in transit or damaged beyond repair, but the shipping logs showed them arriving at private warehouses in the city, owned by a company she had never heard of. The company was Shell Corporation, a ghost. But the signatures on the authorization forms were very real. They belonged to the high-ranking officers she saluted every morning. For a few hours, Anya sat paralyzed. The weight of what she was seeing pressed down on her chest. These weren't just missing items, this was a theft on a massive scale. And worse, the money meant to protect soldiers on the front lines was lining the pockets of the very people command them. She felt sick. Anya was a believer in the system. She believed that if you found a problem, you reported it, and it got fixed. That was how the military worked. That was how honor worked. Taking a deep breath, she printed the documents. She gathered the files, her hands shaking slightly, and walked down the long hallway to the office of her immediate superior, Colonel Miller. She had known Miller for years. He was a tough man, but she thought he was an honest one. She knocked on the door. "Come in," he barked. Anya stepped inside, closing the door behind her for privacy. She laid the files on his desk. "Sir, I think we have a serious problem with the supply audits. I've found a pattern of missing inventory that seems to be redirected to private addresses." Colonel Miller didn't pick up the file. He just looked at her, his face unreadable. "What are you talking about, Anya?" "Sir, look at page 4, she urged him. "Those signatures. That's General Vance's signature. And here, on the construction equipment, that's yours." Miller didn't look down. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. The friendly look he usually gave her vanished. His eyes went cold, like a shark spotting prey. "Anya," he said softly. "You are a logistics officer. Your job is to move things from point A to point B. It is not to look into the back of the truck." "Sir, this is fraud," Anya said, her voice rising in confusion. "This is stealing. We need to call the Inspector General." Miller stood up slowly. He walked around the desk until he was standing right in front of her, looming over her. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You are tired, Anya. You've been working too hard. Maybe it's time you took some leave. Forget about these files." Destroy them. I can't do that, she said, stepping back, shaking off his hand. It's my duty. Your duty, Miller laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was a dangerous sound. Your duty is to this uniform. And sometimes, keeping the peace means not asking questions you don't want the answers to. Anya left the office empty-handed. She didn't destroy the files. Instead, she made a backup copy and hid it in her home. Over the next few weeks, her life on the base slowly turned into a nightmare. She was removed from her position in the logistics office. She was transferred to a dusty, windowless basement room where she was given the job of archiving papers from 20 years ago. No one spoke to her in the cafeteria. Her friends stopped making eye contact in the hallways. She was being iced out, silenced by fear. Then came the formal letter. It was a notice of formal reprimand for dereliction of duty and misconduct. They were accusing her of losing the very files she had tried to report. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. It was a warning shot across the bow. They wanted her to quit. They wanted her to take the hint and disappear quietly. One evening, Anya sat at her kitchen table, the house silent except for the ticking of the clock. She looked at the discharge papers they had threatened her with. If she stayed quiet, she could probably serve out her time, retire with a small pension, and fade away. But as she looked at the picture of her brother, who was serving overseas, she felt a surge of anger. He was out there risking his life with equipment that might be substandard because people like Colonel Miller were stealing the budget. She realized then that the system wasn't going to save her. The system was the problem. Going up the chain of command was useless because the corruption went all the way to the top. She was alone. But she had the truth. It was late, past midnight, but Anya picked up her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call her family. She dialed a number she had found on the internet for a journalist who wrote about military affairs. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. This was the point of no return. Once she made this call, she wasn't just a soldier anymore, she was a traitor in their eyes. She was putting a target on her own back. A groggy voice answered on the third ring. Hello. Anya took a trembling breath. My name is Anya. I'm a chief warrant officer. And I have proof that my command is stealing millions of dollars in supplies. On that quiet night, with the weight of the entire military machine about to come crashing down on her, Anya made her choice. She wasn't just fighting for her career anymore. She was fighting for her soul. She had no idea that in claiming this first small victory of truth, she was setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to the highest court in the land. She only knew that she couldn't stay silent any longer. The silence that followed the phone call didn't last long. Within 48 hours, the story Anya had risked everything to tell was splashed across the front pages of newspapers and leading the evening news. The headline was bold and accusing: Whistleblower claims high-level corruption within military logistics. Anya sat in her small, sparsely furnished living room, watching the television with the sound turned down low, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the blurry footage of the base, the gate where she had reported for duty every day for 15 years. Now, the gates were closed to her. The retaliation was swift and brutal. It wasn't a court-martial right away, that would have drawn too much attention. Instead, they used bureaucracy as a weapon. 2 days after the article broke, an official letter arrived. Anya was being administratively separated from the service. In plain English, she was being fired. They stripped her of her security clearance, banned her from the base, and froze her bank accounts pending an investigation into financial misconduct. The irony was bitter enough to make her choke. They were the ones stealing millions, yet she was the one being treated like a criminal. Anya spent the first few weeks in a daze. Without a paycheck, the bills started piling up. The mortgage on the small house she loved was suddenly a mountain she couldn't climb. The phone didn't stop ringing, but it wasn't friends calling. It was reporters wanting quotes, and it was colleagues whispering that she had lost her mind. The isolation was the hardest part. She had dedicated her adult life to the military family, and now that family had locked her out. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. But Anya wasn't the type to just fade away. With the help of a local union representative, she found a lawyer named David. He wasn't a flashy, high-priced attorney from a big city firm. He was a quiet man who worked out of a cluttered office above a dry cleaner. He listened to her story for 3 hours straight, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, never interrupting. When she finished, he took off his glasses and looked at her with sad, serious eyes. "They are trying to bury you, Anya," David said softly. "They think if they make your life miserable enough, you'll take the deal and sign a non-disclosure agreement just to make the pain stop." "I don't want a deal," Anya said, her voice shaking but firm. "I want my life back. I want them to admit what they did." David nodded. "Then we have to sue them. We have to take the Department of Defense to civil court. It won't be a battlefield with guns, but it will be a war. And it will be ugly." The legal battle that followed was the hardest thing Anya had ever experienced. It dragged on for 2 agonizing years. During that time, Anya had to take a job stocking shelves at a grocery store just to keep the lights on. It was humiliating to go from managing millions of dollars in supplies to counting cans of soup in aisle 4, but she held her head high. She refused to let them see her break. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal. The military's lawyers were aggressive and cold. They dragged Anya into depositions, grilling her for hours, trying to find any dirt they could use to destroy her character. They dug into her past, looking for failed relationships, old speeding tickets, or mistakes she made as a junior officer. They painted her as a disgruntled employee who was angry about a missed promotion. Sitting in those sterile conference rooms, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, Anya often felt like she was drowning. She would come home at night, exhausted and spiritually drained, and stare at the ceiling wondering if it was all worth it. Maybe she should have just taken the deal. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the signatures on those forged documents. She remembered the soldiers in the field who were using substandard equipment because someone wanted a new sports car. That anger kept her going. It was a small flame in the dark, but it never went out. Finally, the week of the trial arrived. The courtroom was small and wood-paneled, filled with the smell of old paper and polished floors. Anya sat at the long table next to David, dressed in a modest gray suit she bought at a thrift store. Across the aisle sat the team of government lawyers, looking sharp and confident in their expensive suits. They had the weight of the Pentagon behind them. Anya only had the truth. David was a master in the courtroom. He didn't use big, complicated words. He just laid out the facts, piece by piece, like building a house. He called witnesses who verified the missing supplies. He brought in experts who showed exactly how the money had been moved through shell companies. And when it was Anya's turn to take the stand, she was terrified. Her hands were sweating, and her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke about her duty, about the oath she took to serve her country, and how that oath compelled her to speak the truth, the room went silent. Even the government lawyers stopped taking notes. The turning point came when David presented the internal emails the military had tried to hide. Emails where Colonel Miller and the others discussed exactly how to get rid of Anya after she reported the theft. There was no denying it. The conspiracy wasn't in her head, it was on paper. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, didn't take long to make her decision. She didn't like bullies, and it was clear to everyone in the room that the military had tried to bully one of their own into silence. On a bright Tuesday morning, the judge read the verdict. She ruled that Anya had been wrongfully terminated. She stated that the evidence of corruption was undeniable and that the military had retaliated against her illegally. The courtroom erupted in a murmur of shock. The government lawyers slumped in their seats, defeated. The judge ordered that Anya be reinstated immediately, with full back pay, all benefits restored, and a significant settlement for the damages she had suffered. Anya didn't scream. She didn't jump for joy. She just put her face in her hands and wept. It was the release of 2 years of pressure, fear, and loneliness. David patted her on the back, a rare smile on his face. They had done it. They had won. Walking out of the courthouse, the flash of cameras was blinding. Reporters shouted questions, microphones were shoved in her face, but for the first time in a long time, Anya didn't shy away. She stood on the steps of the building, the sun warming her face, and smiled. She felt lighter, like she was floating. "I just wanted the truth to be known," she told the cameras. And today, the truth won. For the next few weeks, life felt like a dream. The military had no choice but to comply with the judge's order. The back pay check was large enough to pay off her debts and secure her future. She received a formal letter of apology from the Department of the Army. It was a standard, generic letter, likely written by a public relations officer, but to Anya, it was gold. It was proof. She started looking at houses again, thinking about a fresh start in a new town where nobody knew her story. She felt safe. She felt that the nightmare was finally over. She believed that the military, humiliated by the loss in court, would just let her go quietly. She thought the bad guys had lost, and in the movies, that's where the story ends. The hero rides off into the sunset. But this wasn't a movie. It was real life. And in real life, the people who hold power rarely let a pesky thing like the law stop them from protecting themselves. Anya was busy packing boxes in her living room, humming to herself, completely unaware that across town, in a secure building without windows, a different kind of paperwork was being filed. The civilian court was done with her, but the military court was just getting started. They were biding their time, waiting for her to feel safe, waiting for her to claim victory. Because that is exactly when they plan to strike. The feeling of relief that washed over Anya in the weeks following the trial was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't just happiness, it was a physical sensation, like a heavy stone that had been sitting on her chest for 2 years had suddenly been lifted. For the first time since she had made that fateful phone call, she could breathe deeply. The air smelled sweeter, the sky looked bluer, and the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach had untangled itself. Life began to take on a rhythm that felt almost normal. The checks from the settlement arrived, and for the first time in a long time, Anya didn't have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. She walked into the grocery store where she had worked stocking shelves, not as an employee, but as a customer. She bought the expensive cuts of meat she used to walk past, the fancy coffee she used to deny herself. It wasn't about being greedy, it was about reclaiming dignity. It was about proving to herself that she wasn't a failure. The military, bound by the civil court's ruling, had to follow through on their end of the deal. It was a strange, quiet process. There was no brass band, no welcome home parade, but the administrative wheels turned. Her rank was reinstated in the personnel files. The letter of reprimand was expunged from her record as if it had never existed. Even her security clearance was reactivated, though she had no desire to use it again. One Tuesday afternoon, a certified letter arrived from the Department of Defense. It was on thick, cream-colored stationery with the official gold seal embossed at the top. Inside was a formal apology. It was written in the kind of bureaucratic language that lawyers use, words like regrettable oversight, procedural errors, and unintended hardship. It didn't say we lied about you, or we tried to destroy your life because you caught us stealing. It was cold and impersonal. But as Anya held the paper, she realized it didn't matter what tone they used. It was an admission. It was proof on paper that she was right, and they were wrong. She bought a simple wooden frame and put the letter on her mantelpiece, right next to a photo of her family. It was her trophy. With her future secure, Anya started looking toward the next chapter. She decided she didn't want to stay in the town where everyone knew her as the whistleblower. She wanted a fresh start. She contacted a real estate agent, a friendly woman with a bright smile, and began looking at houses about 2 hours away, near the coast. House hunting became her new favorite hobby. It was a world away from the dusty basements and courtrooms she had been living in. She walked through empty living rooms, imagining where she would put her couch, running her hands along smooth granite countertops, picturing herself cooking dinner in a bright, sunny kitchen. She found a place she loved, a small cottage with a porch overlooking a garden. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was everything she had been fighting for. During this time, the media attention began to fade. The headlines that had screamed about corruption and conspiracy were replaced by celebrity gossip and political scandals. Reporters stopped calling. Anya was grateful for the silence. She felt like she could finally blend back into the crowd, just a regular citizen going about her life. Even her interactions with old colleagues took on a strange new vibe. While the higher ups who had orchestrated the campaign against her had quietly retired or been shuffled off to desk jobs in remote locations, the people she used to work with were still around. Anya ran into a former pilot, a man named Tom, at a coffee shop. In the past, he would have crossed the street to avoid her. But now, he walked right up to her table. "I saw the news," Tom said, looking a bit awkward, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you stuck it out, Anya. We all knew what was going on, but nobody had the guts to say it." Hearing those words meant more to Anya than the money or the apology letter. It healed the lonely part of her soul. She realized that she hadn't just fought for herself, she had fought for them, too. She smiled at Tom, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thanks, Tom. It means a lot." She started to let her guard down. The paranoia that had kept her awake at night, checking the locks on her doors twice, started to fade. She stopped looking over her shoulder when she walked to her car. She stopped encrypting her emails. She felt that the civil court victory had created a shield around her, a magical barrier that the military couldn't touch. She thought the story was over. She thought the bad guys had lost and gone home to lick their wounds. Anya felt so safe that she even started making plans for the future. She talked to David, her lawyer, about maybe writing a book or teaching at a university. She thought about using the settlement money to start a scholarship for young women who wanted to serve in logistics. She was dreaming again, and those dreams were big and colorful. About a month after she won the case, Anya spent a lovely afternoon at the cottage she wanted to buy. She sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, watching the birds in the garden. She was mentally signing the contract, mentally packing her boxes. She felt a profound sense of peace. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. I won, she whispered to herself. It's finally over. She felt like a survivor of a shipwreck who had finally swum to shore. She was exhausted but safe. She was ready to rest. She didn't know that in the legal world, rest is a luxury that whistleblowers rarely get to keep. She didn't know that while the civil courts deal with employment and money, the military has its own set of laws, its own courts, and its own long memory. The military machine was slow, but it was relentless. The men and women Anya had exposed were powerful, and they did not like being humiliated. They were angry, and they were patient. They had been watching her relax, watching her celebrate, watching her think she was untouchable. They were waiting for the exact moment when she felt most safe, because that is when people make mistakes. That is when they stop watching for the knife in the dark. Anya finished her tea and stood up, stretching her arms wide. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. She drove home with the windows down and the radio up, singing along to an old song. She stopped at a red light and glanced in the rearview mirror. She saw her own face happy, relaxed, and completely unafraid. She smiled at her reflection, put the car in gear, and drove forward, completely unaware that the trap had already been set. The paperwork was already filed. The date was already set. The victory she was celebrating was about to become the biggest liability of her life. The sun was shining brightly on the Friday afternoon when Anya was supposed to sign the papers for her new life. She sat at a small wooden table in the real estate agent's office, the smell of fresh coffee and old carpet filling the air. In front of her lay the contract for the cottage by the coast. It was exactly 10 pages thick, representing everything she had fought for over the last 2 years. Her real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Linda, was chatting away about the garden and the neighbors, but Anya was only half listening. She was just ready to sign. Her hand hovered over the paper, pen in hand, ready to make it official. This was the moment where she closed the door on the nightmare and stepped into the future. She smiled at Linda, feeling a lightness in her chest that hadn't been there for a long time. I'm ready, Anya said softly. Just as the tip of the pen touched the paper to make the first stroke of her signature, the heavy glass door of the office swung open. The bell above the door jingled sharply, cutting through the quiet conversation. 2 men walked in. They weren't wearing military uniforms, but they didn't look like civilians either. They wore dark suits that were a little too stiff, and they had the rigid posture and intense, unblinking eyes of men who were used to being obeyed. The air in the room seemed to grow heavy and cold the moment they stepped inside. Linda stopped talking mid-sentence, her smile fading. The men didn't look at her. They walked straight to Anya's table. Anya, the taller man asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any politeness. Anya looked up, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the vibe. It was the vibe of a predator. Yes. Are you Anya, former chief warrant officer? I am, she said, putting the pen down slowly. Can I help you? The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't a letter this time, it was a thick stack of papers bound together with a black ribbon. He placed it on the table right on top of the house contract, covering the signature line. "You've been served," he said. And just like that, they turned and walked out. The door jingled again as they left, leaving the office in a stunned, suffocating silence. Anya stared at the envelope. It had the seal of the Department of the Army on it, but it wasn't the seal she was used to seeing on paperwork. This was different. It was the seal of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military lawyers. "What is this?" Linda asked, her voice shaking a little. "Did you do something wrong?" Anya didn't answer. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She carefully undid the black ribbon and opened the document. She read the first line, and the blood drained from her face. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a complaint. It was a summons. A summons to appear before a general court-martial. The room started to spin. Anya read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of them. Violation of the Espionage Act, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conduct unbecoming an officer. It was a list of terrifying crimes, each one carrying a sentence of decades in prison. "This can't be right," Anya whispered. Her voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "I won. The civil court judge said I won. They can't do this." She grabbed her phone with shaking fingers and dialed David. He picked up on the first ring. "David," she choked out. "They just served me. They're court-martialing me for espionage." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she heard David sigh deeply, a sound of pure exhaustion. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "Afraid of what? What are you talking about?" Anya cried out. "I have the settlement letter. They apologized." "Anya, listen to me," David said, his voice urgent. "The civil court rules on employment law. They ruled that you were fired illegally and that you deserve your pension. That is done. It is finished. But the military operates under a completely different set of laws. It's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or the UCMJ. It's a separate world." "What does that mean?" Anya asked, tears stinging her eyes. "It means that while the civilian judge can force them to give you your job back, he cannot stop them from prosecuting you for how you got the evidence. They are claiming that by giving those documents to the press, you didn't just expose corruption, you exposed national secrets. And under military law, that is a crime. A very serious crime." Anya felt like she couldn't breathe. "But the documents proved they were stealing." "How is that a secret?" "Because they were classified," David explained gently. "And you didn't have the authority to declassify them. They are using the law as a weapon, Anya. They know they can't win on the corruption anymore, so they are changing the battlefield. They don't care about the money. They want to put you in a cage." She looked up at Linda, whose face was pale with worry. The contract for the beautiful cottage by the sea sat there, forgotten and useless. It felt like a cruel joke. Only an hour ago, she was planning her housewarming party. Now, she was planning how to survive a prison sentence. Later that evening, Anya sat at her kitchen table, the house dark except for the light over the stove. The summons sat in front of her, a monster made of paper. She realized now that her victory in civil court hadn't ended the war, it had only enraged the enemy. The military wasn't interested in justice or truth anymore. They were interested in revenge and damage control. They were going to drag her back into a courtroom, but this time it wouldn't be a civil court with a friendly judge and a jury of regular people. It would be a military tribunal. The judges would be high-ranking officers. The jury would be a panel of soldiers. The deck wasn't just stacked against her, the entire building was built to crush her. She thought about running. The thought crossed her mind for a second, just grabbing her keys and driving until she ran out of gas. But she knew there was nowhere to go. You can't run from the military. They have resources normal people can't even imagine. They would find her, and it would only make things worse. David came over an hour later. He didn't bring his yellow legal pad this time. He brought a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and slid one toward Anya. They played the long game, David said, sitting down heavily. They let you celebrate. They let you think you won. They even paid you the settlement. They did all that just so you would lower your guard. And the moment you thought you were safe, bam. Why? Anya asked, the taste of the whiskey burning her throat. Why go through all this trouble just to hurt me? Because of the message, David said. If they let you walk away happy, then every other soldier who sees corruption will think, hey, I can do what Anya did. I can tell the truth and get a payout. They can't have that. They need to make an example out of you. They need everyone to see that even if you win in civil court, the military court will destroy you. The reality of it settled over Anya like a shroud. She wasn't just a person anymore. She was a warning. A cautionary tale. The victory she had claimed just weeks ago was turning out to be the most dangerous trap of all. Anya looked out the window into the darkness. She saw shadows moving in the yard, but she knew it was just the wind. Still, she felt watched. She felt like she was standing on a cliff edge, and the ground beneath her feet was starting to crumble. She had fought hard to get her life back, but now she realized she was going to have to fight harder than ever just to keep her freedom. They think I'm going to plead guilty, Anya said suddenly, her voice hardening. That's why they gave me these charges. They want to scare me into taking a deal. They probably do, David admitted. Then they don't know me very well, Anya said, picking up the heavy summons. She wasn't crying anymore. She was angry. A cold, fierce anger burned in her chest. They want a war, then they've got one. She looked at the papers that threatened to take away her freedom. She thought about the soldiers in the desert, the stolen money, and the arrogance of the men who tried to bury her. They thought they had made a move that would checkmate her. They thought they had won by changing the rules. Anya stood up, turning on the kitchen light, chasing away the shadows. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to run. If the military court wanted a fight, she was going to give them one. The game had changed, yes. The stakes were higher, certainly. But Anya was done playing by their rules. She looked at the date on the summons, the date she would have to stand before the tribunal. It was exactly 1 month away. Call the press, Anya told David. If they want to make this public, then let's make it really public. The victory she had claimed was dust, but from that dust, a new fire was starting. The military had made their move, but they had also made a mistake. They had underestimated her. And that was going to cost them. The morning of the court-martial was crisp and cold, the kind of morning that usually made Anya feel alive. Today, however, the air just felt sharp enough to cut. She stood in front of the mirror in her small bedroom, dressed once again in the uniform she had worn for 15 years. It felt heavy now, like a costume belonging to a stranger. She adjusted her collar, staring into her own eyes. She looked for fear, but she didn't find it. Instead, she found a strange, quiet resolve. She wasn't walking into a courtroom today to argue about paychecks or job titles. She was walking in to fight for her very freedom. The base was different this time. When she arrived at the legal center, the streets were lined with military police. There were no friendly salutes, no waves from familiar faces. Just stone-faced guards checking IDs. The atmosphere inside the courthouse was even worse. It was suffocatingly quiet. The floors were so polished you could see your reflection in them, and the walls were lined with flags of the nation and the various service branches. It was majestic, designed to remind you of the power of the institution. It was designed to make you feel small. David met her in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked tired. His tie was slightly loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He had been up all night preparing the final arguments. "They are going to come at you hard today, Anya," David whispered, stepping close so the guards wouldn't hear. "The prosecution isn't interested in the stolen money anymore. They are going to focus entirely on the leak. They are going to paint you as a traitor who sold out her country to the newspapers." "I didn't sell anything," Anya said, her voice steady. "I told the truth." "I know that, and you know that," David said, gripping her arm gently. "But the jury isn't a jury of your peers. They are active duty officers. Their careers depend on following orders. They are going to be scared to go against the establishment." Anya nodded. She understood the dynamic. She had lived it her whole life. She took a deep breath, opened the heavy oak door, and walked into the lion's den. The courtroom was formal and intimidating. At the front sat the judge, a stern-faced colonel with silver hair and eyes that could freeze water. To the side sat the prosecution team, led by a man named Captain Evans. Evans looked like he had been chiseled out of stone. He didn't look at Anya with hatred, he looked at her like she was a stain on the rug that he had been ordered to scrub out. The proceedings began exactly on time. The prosecution called their witnesses. They were generals and colonels, men with chests full of medals who spoke in booming voices about operational security and the sanctity of classified information. They spoke in circles, using big words to hide the simple fact that Anya had embarrassed them. When Captain Evans gave his closing argument, he was terrifying. He walked slowly in front of the jury box, his hands clasped behind his back. "Ladies and gentlemen of the panel," Evans said, his voice low and serious. "We are not here to debate supply contracts. We are here to defend the law. When an officer takes an oath, she promises to protect secrets. If an officer decides which secrets are worth keeping and which are worth telling, the system crumbles. Anya let her personal feelings override the law. She gave our enemies a roadmap of our weaknesses. That is not whistleblowing. That is a crime." It sounded convincing. Even Anya felt a twinge of doubt for a second. Had she done the wrong thing? Then she looked at the back of the room. The public gallery was full. David had made sure of that. There were reporters, and there were families of soldiers who served. They were watching closely. Then it was David's turn. He stood up, straightening his jacket. He wasn't a military man, and he didn't sound like one. He sounded like a concerned citizen. "The prosecution is right about one thing," David said. "The law matters. But the law isn't just a set of rules written in a book. The law is about justice. And justice is not a technicality." He turned to look at the panel. "Anya is being prosecuted for telling the truth about a crime. The people she exposed stole millions of dollars meant to protect you, your children, and your friends. They hid their theft behind a classified stamp. If we convict Anya for exposing that, We aren't protecting secrets. We are protecting thieves. The judge dismissed the court for a lunch recess. The atmosphere was tense as Anya and David sat in a small conference room to eat sandwiches they had brought from home. They didn't talk much. There wasn't anything left to say. The arguments had been made. The die was cast. Just as they were about to head back in, the door opened. It was Captain Evans. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "We have a deal," Evans said, sliding the paper across the table to Anya. "The general is willing to show leniency. If you plead guilty to the misdemeanor charge of mishandling documents, we will drop the espionage charge. You will receive a reprimand, but no prison time. You can leave the military with an honorable discharge. You keep your life." Anya looked at the paper. It was a way out. She could sign it, walk away, and sleep in her own bed tonight. She would have a record, technically, but she would be free. "Just sign it, Anya," David whispered, leaning in. "This is the best we can hope for. If you fight this, you could go to prison for 10 years. Please. Take the deal." Anna picked up the pen. She looked at the signature line. It would be so easy. Just one scribble and the nightmare would end. She thought about the cottage by the ocean. She thought about sitting on the porch, drinking tea, watching the birds. She thought about a normal life. But then she thought about the apology letter on her mantelpiece. The one where they said they were wrong. She thought about the smug look on Colonel Miller's face when he told her to forget what she saw. She realized that signing this paper wouldn't be an escape. It would be admitting that she was the criminal. It would validate their lie. If she signed, they would use this case to scare every other soldier into silence forever. "No," Anya said. She put the pen down. "What?" David asked, his eyes wide with panic. "Anya, be smart." "I am being smart," she said, looking Captain Evans in the eye. "I didn't break the law. I upheld it. I'm not signing a confession for a crime I didn't commit. If you want to send me to prison for telling the truth, then you are going to have to do it. But I will not lie to save myself." Evans stared at her for a long moment. He shook his head slowly. "You are making a terrible mistake, Anya. We will reconvene in 10 minutes. When they walked back into the courtroom, the energy was different. The reporters could sense that a deal had been offered and rejected. The tension was so thick it tasted like copper. Anya sat in her chair, her back straight. She didn't look at the jury. She just looked forward. The judge came back in. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman of the jury stood up. "We have, sir." The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of her life. "On the charge of espionage," the foreman began. "We find the defendant not guilty." A ripple of shock went through the room. Anya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "On the charge of mishandling classified information," the foreman continued. "We find the defendant guilty." It was a split verdict. Not guilty on the big, life-destroying charge. Guilty on the smaller one. The judge banged his gavel. The members of the jury filed out. The judge looked down at Anya. "Ms. Anya, you have been found guilty of mishandling information. However, considering the circumstances of your service and the nature of the leak, I am sentencing you to time served. You are free to go." A gasp went through the gallery. Time served, it meant she was walking out the door right now. It meant no prison. It meant the military court had tried to crush her, but in the end, they had blinked. Anya stood up. She felt lightheaded. She had won. Maybe not a total victory, but she was standing. She walked out of the courtroom, past Captain Evans, past the military police, past the reporters shouting questions. She walked out into the bright afternoon sun. David was beside her, grinning from ear to ear. "I told you it would be tough. I can't believe they let you walk." "They didn't let me do anything, David," Anya said, looking up at the sky. "I walked out on my own." She got into her car and started the engine. She drove off the base, passing through the gates one last time. She didn't look back at the buildings or the flags. She looked forward at the road stretching out ahead of her. She knew the military would never welcome her back. She knew there would be no pension waiting for her in the mail. She had spent everything she had to get here. But as she drove toward the coast, toward the cottage with the garden, Anya realized she had something much more valuable than money or rank. She had her honor. And nobody, not even a military court, could ever take that away from her. She hummed a quiet tune to herself, and for the first time in years, the music sounded like freedom.